Hey everybody, in today's video we're going to be taking a quick look at the new Z Series 24-200. Okay, so what I'd like to start out by doing first is just talking you through some of the features of this lens. Then I'm going to go into kind of what my opinions are on this lens so far, and then kind of show you some size comparisons against other lenses, on camera bodies, just lenses, against things like the 28-300, 24-120, and so on. So I have had this lens for a couple of weeks. It is obviously a 24-200 millimeter. It's an f4 to f6.3. And it starts at 24, so unlike the 24-70 f4 and the 14-30 f4, where they have that kind of initial lockdown, this just starts directly at 24 and then extends all the way to 200. It does have a lock, but this is an actual lock switch on the side. That lock switch only allows you to lock the lens at 24 millimeters. If the lens is at another millimeter, you cannot lock it in place. One interesting thing about this lens is it's the first full frame non-S-line lens for the Z series. And there's a couple of things that kind of show you that, if that makes sense. The one big one is that the lettering for the focal length and the aperture they're more like printed on rather than engraved. So on some of the S-line lenses, the lettering is clearly engraved into the barrel, whereas this one is kind of almost printed on rather than engraved. Also, because it's a non-S-line lens, the mount is still a metal mount, but it's an aluminium mount, or aluminum mount, on which way you want to say it. It's also missing an autofocus or manual focus switch directly on the lens. I do know that a lot of people kind of like to have that switch on the side of the lens, so some of you might not like that, but you can obviously turn the camera to autofocus or manual focus in the camera body, especially if you've got it set to your eye menu, for example, but there is no switch on the side of the lens itself. The lens does extend all the way to 200, but it doesn't make the lens particularly too big or front heavy. A lot of the weight still sits in the middle of the lens, so don't feel like it's going to unbalance the lens on the camera body. It does actually feel really nice on the camera body as well. The build quality still feels good. It's not necessarily massively any different from kind of the 24-70 f4, for example, even though it's not an S-line lens. The outer build quality, the grips are still nice, the dials still feel okay, especially everything that you touch and that you use. The zoom mechanism has got a real kind of weight to it. It's not like, you know, difficult to zoom in and out, but it does just feel nice and smooth, but then weighted. And I do really like that. It means that you're not going to accidentally zoom it. Even though it's got the little lock switch to lock it at 24, it's not necessarily going to start creeping out unless it's over a long period of time. So I just want to have a quick overview of the picture quality of kind of what I've noticed and my thoughts and feelings over kind of this lens. The biggest thing for me is this lens really caught me by surprise. So I've never been one to shoot all-in-one lenses. Some of the 28-300s, the 24-120s, 18-300s or 18-200 millimeter lenses. I've just never used those types of lenses in either a professional capacity or even when kind of going and shooting just normal everyday stuff. I have obviously used them to some extent, but never for my own photography. And the reason for that is I was always ready to make the sacrifice of carrying multiple focal lengths, be it prime lenses or just shorter focal length zoom lenses, so 24-70s or 70-200s. And so I was never really going to be the type of person that was going to get incredibly excited about this lens, or the type of person that may have used this lens a lot, but it's really caught me off guard in terms of the picture quality it produces. This lens at 24 millimeters all the way up to 20 millimeters is incredibly sharp. It was much sharper and detailed and well controlled than I was expecting it to be. So much so that I've done a very quick, and I will do a more detailed comparison, but I've done a very quick comparison against this and the 24-70 f4, and there's not really a lot of difference. Obviously, this has a variable aperture, and the 24-70 f4 is an f4, but whether this lens is at 24 millimeters, 50 millimeters, or 70 millimeters, it's quite difficult on the back of the camera to tell the difference between this lens and the 24-70 f4. That obviously goes a long way because a lot of you really already like the 24 to 70 f4. So this lens does perform really well. It caught me by surprise. I just wasn't expecting it to be as sharp and as detailed as it is. It's a really, really useful lens for a lot of photographers because of that usable range. And I do feel like for a lot of people, especially for people who don't want to buy kind of the Z series 70 to 200, this is going to be a go-to all-in-one lens for a lot of photographers, and they're not going to be disappointed by the picture quality of it. The only real reason this lens isn't an S-line lens is because it doesn't have some of the higher end coatings, and I generally think it's down to just the fact that it doesn't have a constant aperture. It's just going to be a non-S-line lens because it doesn't have that constant aperture, because it's an f4 to f6.3. So when you are at 200 mil, you are going to be at an aperture of f6.3, but that's still not too bad for most people, especially if you're using a Z6, because you can just rely on the higher ISO. But I generally feel like the actual quality of this, in terms of sharpness, in good, well-lit situations, is going to be more than good enough for the vast majority of people that want this lens in their kit. If you know that you're going to be kind of a really stickler for picture quality and a faster aperture, then obviously that's where the 24 to 70 2.8 and the 70 to 200 2.8 come in, but then you know you're carrying a larger, heavier lens. So I was really, really shocked and really taken back by how good this lens is. Honestly, I am being as honest as possible here, that I just wasn't expecting this to be as good as it is, and it did catch me out. I think especially for landscape photography, those of you that kind of want to shoot landscape on 24 to 70s, and sometimes just using that longer focal length to compress backgrounds in landscape photography, kind of the 100 to 200 mil range can be really useful. So I do think that this is going to be a well-received lens, and those people that do buy it are really going to love it because I have been so impressed by it so far. So I thought it'd be useful for me to talk you through that variable aperture and how it changes as the focal length changes. So the way that this lens is going to change as you zoom in is obviously when you're at 24 millimeters, it's going to sit at f4. When you get to 27 millimeters, it's going to go to f4.2. When you get to 35 millimeters, it's going to go to f4.8. When you get to 50 millimeters on the lens, it's going to be at f5.6. When you get to 70 millimeters, it's going to be f6. And then when you get to 80 millimeters, it's going to hit that f6.3. And then obviously anything longer than 80 millimeters, so 100 millimeters, all the way up to 200 millimeters, is going to be at f6.3. This is another lens that has VR built in. So there's VR built into this lens, and we're going to be in a situation where the camera you're using, if you're using a Z6 and a Z7, can use its in-body stabilization with the VR in the lens. Obviously, for longer focal lengths, having VR in the lens is still incredibly useful, as well as using in-body stabilization. Now, if any of you have watched my 70 to 200 2.8 video, I mentioned that when you're using that 70 to 200 2.8 on a Z6, I could shoot a shutter speed as slow as 1/10 of a second and still get a really sharp picture, relying on the in-body stabilization and the built-in VR in the lens. I still absolutely stand by that. I have the shot at 1/10 of a second. It's still perfectly sharp. However, with this lens, I cannot shoot that slow. So there's obviously, as you would expect, these are two different lenses. But the VR system just does not allow me to shoot as slow with this lens than I can do with the 70 to 200 2.8. And I kind of feel like that's a given, really. So the slowest I can shoot handheld on a Z7 with this lens using the VR and the in-body stabilization is 1/20th of a second. So it's not a massive difference, but it's just that extra bit of speed that you'll need to put in just to make sure it's going to be nice and sharp. And that's obviously purely just down to the fact that the VR system in this just isn't going to cover as many stops as the 70 to 200 2.8 would, but then they're in completely different price brackets, they're a completely different range of lenses, so I kind of expect that. And I feel like this still does a really good job of stabilizing the viewfinder and stabilizing your shot, because it's not just relying on in-body stabilization, it's also using VR in the lens as well. I have done a couple of quick size comparisons against other lenses, and also some kind of close-up detailed shots as well, and then also just on camera bodies as well, to give you an idea what this lens looks like, whether it's zoomed wide or zoomed into the longer focal length. So we'll go take a look at those now, and I hope you find them useful. As I mentioned at the start, I have had this lens for a couple of weeks, and I just can't express to you enough how impressed I've been. I can't wait to do some much more detailed picture comparisons against things like the 24-70 f4, the f-mount 28-300, the f-mount 24-120 f4, see how it compares against that. But if you're using a Z6 or a Z7, or even a Z50, this works really nice on a Z50. Obviously, you get even longer focal length at the long end. But if you've got one of those cameras and you want kind of a good all-in-one travel lens, I would look no further than this. It's been wonderful for me. Obviously, that can change as I start to do more detailed tests. I'm going to hold off a final judgment until I start doing some of those more detailed comparisons, and obviously I'll make those videos for you guys. But right now, I really like it. I hope that you found this video about the 24-200 useful. Just to give you a heads up about some videos that I've got coming up, I do have the new 20mm 1.8. So the next video that will be up probably in a couple of days will be a quick look, again similar to this video, about that 20mm 1.8, what my thoughts are about that as a lens, that type of thing. Then after those videos, I've also got a video coming up where I have been out and about shooting wildlife photography with my Z6 and my Z7, both with firmware 3.0. So I just want to do kind of a summary video about the shots that I took, the kit that I used, what autofocusing systems I used, if I saw any massive difference with firmware 3.0. And that's just all going to be based around kind of the trip that I had about a couple of days ago. If any of you follow me on my Instagram account, you would have seen some of the interesting things that I've done on that trip. So I'm going to put a video together about my experiences with firmware 3.0 so far, just to kind of give you guys the information that I've got in my head. And then beyond that, I know that you're all waiting for 70-200 2.8. That video will be available once it's ready, but it will be available at some point, so please keep that in mind. Thank you very much for watching. I hope that you found this video useful. Please do give us a like and pop a comment down below if you've got any questions. And if you're not subscribed already, then please do. And as always, thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.